We're recording in Jan 2026, and my guest today is my friend Wei Zhuang, founder and CEO of Ailytics. Welcome, Wei Zhuang.
Thank you very much, Murli, for having me. Honored to be on this podcast. It's my very first podcast, so my virgin podcast. Excited to talk about the topic today. Looking forward.
Great. I mean, the fact that this is your first podcast is also an honor for us. So thanks for doing it. Before we get there, just tell us, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Wei Zhuang. I am actually a technical nerd by default. I really like to play computer games. At one point in my life, I thought I was going to be a professional gamer.
Really?
And then I just fell in love with computers and code in general and, creating nothing out of just software and a simple computer, right? And I started off my career in the software engineering industry. Then I went to love kind of aerospace or fell in love with planes in general. So I blended both together and ended up in Boeing in my early days of my career. Shortly after that, I felt like, there was a calling to try and do something because all my life I wanted to start something. I did start multiple small businesses along the way during various stages of my life, but none of them were actual, real, full-fledged startups. They were more like small, home-based kind of businesses. And when the opportunity arose to do that, I actually took the leap of faith to do R&D and an MBA at the same time while I was still working at Boeing to work on Ailytics and in 2021. And that is where we are today.
And in one or two sentences, what is Ailytics?
Ailytics is basically a vision AI solution company, and we specialize in tapping into any existing camera infrastructure to monitor productivity, safety, and security in real time to help end users make better informed decisions of their operations.
Do you remember how we first came across each other?
Yes, it was at an expo, one of your interns. So I can't really remember his or her name already. On top of the intern, I think our existing investor at that time, Teshing and Xiaoning, were also connected to you guys in some form. They shoot across an email to say, check us out, fill out the form. I did that, and I think the whole process was pretty quick. But that was kind of how we met, at least from what I recall.
No, you're completely right. And I think this proves to any founders who are listening to this who want to come and talk to us that we actually read all the stuff that we get through our form. It's not a black hole. And I guess equally important, everyone on our team is sort of out there looking for stuff. It's not just associates or partners or whatever. An intern who was probably 17 years old at the time brought us Ailytics, and we eventually invested. So it's a very real example of how this happened. So on the trade show itself, I thought what could really be helpful to our audience is thinking through and hearing from someone like you who's not sort of, I would say, a very big company yet, right? You're in the fast growing phase. You're growing very quickly. We don't have to say how quickly you're growing, and in case there are competitors listening. It's interesting and relevant to early stage founders because they're probably at a stage similar to you or maybe slightly behind, right? So what you have to say is both relevant and relatable because you're still in that similar phase, right? So on that note, when thinking about growth levers, right, there's many ways to do growth. Trade shows is an obvious one, but you can also go and do direct sales. You can have BDRs who are calling people and then setting up meetings for the direct sales people. You can do automated outbound. You can do mission trips. Singapore government in particular actually supports a lot of Singapore startups to go outside, etc. Now that are listed so many of these, and there's probably 5 more you can list if you think about it, desktop research, etc. Either two ends of the spectrum, right? Either you could say, look, I'm going to try one or two of these things, and whichever works, double down on it and go. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to say, look, I'm actually going to think through very sort of logically with a framework-based approach, and I've got limited resources, and I'll pick the one that I think has the best bang for the buck. Where did you fall on that? All these various options, and how did you go about thinking through what you should go and do?
It's important to consider, regardless of the approach, I think first is the fundamentals of being and principles of being resource constrained and laser focused on experimentation. As a startup, of course, you don't have the luxury of time, you don't have the luxury of resources, money, etc. So what we tend to do is exactly like you said, so some of those options that we explore, but we explore the route in each of those options a bit, you could say, unconventionally per se.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, for example, let's say if it's a trade show, we have partners, right, that we work with, camera installers, system integrators, resellers, distributors. When we started Ailytics, I always made the embarrassing ask of asking them, I know you have a booth. Can you just give me a 1x1, 2x2 meter spot to stand there with my banner and tag alongside you? And most of the time, they'll be more than happy to say yes to some extent, of course, in exchange for certain things and the way we work together. But it comes at almost no cost in some cases, right? For example, even in trade shows, there are a lot of various options where it's startup, booth friendly, or if you work with this XYZ organization, you get a huge discount. So I think you got to be wary that when you go for any trade show, exhibition, etc., there's not only one type of option available to get yourself there. And that being said, sometimes even being a visitor is not necessarily a bad thing. You could go to exhibitions as a visitor, visit all the booths, talk to the relevant parties, customers, partners, competitors, and find out a lot of interesting information as well.
Just like our intern did.
Exactly, just like our intern did, and that's why we are here today.
Yeah. We didn't have a booth. The intern just was pounding the floors and he found you guys. So let's go, I think, deeper into trade shows, conferences, events of any kind, and get really tactical, right? We're not giving high-level strategy here. Let's get down to brass tacks. I mean, I've seen you at so many conferences and trade shows. When I'm attending for my own reasons, I might be speaking, I might be just attending to find out what's going on in that country or whatever, and suddenly I see you pop up there, right? I've seen you 5 times more often than I've seen any other portfolio company founder. And you're not there to waste your time. You're really getting value out of it, which is why I thought we should talk to you about your experience, particularly why trade shows are useful to you, and a big part of your GTM, essentially your tofu, right? How do you create your tofu? That's why I thought we would have this conversation.
For me, I think the last time we bumped into each other was Vietnam.
Yes.
Right? What I would say for us is that, surprising or not surprisingly, we don't actually spend a lot of money on exhibitions and trade shows. It's because of, as part of the GTM strategy, a lot of the networks that we have built, and of course the way you can enter a trade show or seminar cost effectively. But the reason why we spend so much time on it is because it, exactly like you said, the tofu top of funnel, it builds that top of funnel, but there will be different needs for different types of trade shows at different points of the startup's growth. For example, I'm in Singapore now. We are quite, I would say, relatively dominant here for construction video analytics. There's almost not much value for me to go to another local construction expo or a safety expo here, because there's not much ROI, or even it's more like a friends reunion when I go to one. I just meet all the guys that we work with already, right? So you generally outgrow to some extent some of them as well, and then you look for others overseas in verticals and markets. But sometimes when you go to expos and you show up, from a market optics visibility perspective, like exactly like you said, oh, you see me like all over the place. Yeah, but I was technically I am in a lot of places, but it seems like I'm in a lot more places than I'm actually in.
Yeah,
that is important from a market signaling perspective, that you are telling people, I'm not a tourist company startup. I'm not here to just attend one expo, meet some people, and then try to do remote business later. We have a plan, and that's why we are here. And I'm here in the important events and the important country/tech/industry events, so that people remember that we are there, and they will think about us when they have some request, some inquiry, some partner, some customer, or whoever that they want to link us up with, right? So for example, the last event that we met each other in Vietnam, it was my second time in Vietnam. During that trip, I basically spent 2 days to meet all my previous Vietnam and ongoing Vietnamese contacts and partners. But at the same time, we actually did some site visits as well. And we are close to closing a deal in Vietnam. We have not closed it yet, but because of that constant touch point and giving the customer the assurance and confidence that you are here to stay and support, that's a very strong signal. Of course, you have to really do it, not just go there all the time and visit a bunch of people and do nothing, but you got to market signaling and optics are very key as well.
How do you decide whether a trade show or a conference is even worth going into?
Let me dissect it a bit, because trade show and conferences are slightly different. When I say trade show, I'm talking about big exhibitions. There's a booth, some speaker stages, some events, etc. around it. For trade shows, we like to go to the ones that are either startup focused in the market that you are interested in. For example, Switch in Singapore, GITEX, Slush in Europe, etc. These are quite good tech startup focused exhibitions, and they do have startup friendly packages as well. The purpose of going to those is not necessarily about acquiring customers. I think in general, trade shows at the start for startup, yes, you try to acquire customers, but that is not the only thing you should be going there for.
Okay.
You should be going there to understand the landscape in terms of what people are saying about your product, what do they need, what kind of challenges do they face. It's a lot of market intelligence for you as well to understand how to fine-tune your GTM or your product to that specific market or their customers. At the same time, you also need to leverage on that opportunity to look at your competitors, which are likely there as well, on what kind of solutions they are offering and the gaps. So maybe I can share this very nice experience I had in US. It's a very big construction tech trade show called Blueprint. And in that expo, there was a manager that walked past our booth, like manager in the sense like C-suite kind of level of general contractor firm. And he looked at our solution and he said, this would be really interesting, very good for monitoring my guys. When I asked him what does my guys mean, what he meant was he wanted to monitor whether his safety officers were doing their work and not about whether the people were safe at site. At least that's his main intention. And of course, I explained to him how this could help him do that. And then he walks away, and 30 minutes later, a safety officer, not from the same company, right? A safety officer walks past our booth, and he really likes the solution because it helps him to identify all the unseen issues that are quite common and happening every day on site with the workers and the subcontractors. But at the same time, he was worried for himself because he said that my boss is likely to use this against me as well, which would hinder him being able to use the solution effectively, which I thought was kind of like a full circle moment, right? So that kind of comment and hypothesis generation is very critical in a trade show because you get to meet all kinds of people from all kinds of various trades and companies. And I think that's the part that a lot of companies, when they go to trade shows, they miss because they think that it's about getting all the partners and the customers, and then they forget to leverage on these opportunities to have those conversations with people to extract this intel. So that is what I would highly recommend in terms of trade shows, tech, startup focus. So that's kind of the first category. The second type of trade show that you should kind of specialize on or focus on is industry specific. So industry specific for us, it's very clear we operate for all heavy industries. So we go to anything related to workplace safety, construction, manufacturing, logistics, etc. Again, you got to be focused in the sense that you want to be targeting these industry-specific trade shows in relevant markets that you are ready to go, because it's no point you go there, you generate a bunch of intel and information, you follow up with the leads, but you have no way to action on them afterwards, and those conversations tend to die off. The other tip that I would say for this kind of industry-specific trade shows is that there are a lot of them. There's just too much of them.
Yeah.
And you gotta be cautious about understanding which one is best for you, in the sense that some of them are more investor focused. Some of them might be more commercial transaction focused. Some of them might be more distribution channel partner focused. So there are slightly minor nuances in each of the different types of trade show, even though they say that I'm just the best manufacturing or the largest manufacturing trade show, right? And you got to do that due diligence on the trade show. Don't be easily swayed by the guy trying to sell you a booth at the trade show, because at the end of the day, that's their salesman and they have to do that. Ask people who have been to trade shows, that specific one before, or ask partners, and get that early feedback on whether it makes sense for you to go. From a trade show perspective, I think just focus on these key areas before deciding which one to go. In terms of conferences, our group conferences, seminars, forums as another category. And those tend to be smaller group, more tightly focused, more strict in terms of who they allow on the buy side and sell side to go to these events. A lot of the rules that I mentioned for trade shows also apply here to some extent. But the only other few points to take note of is that for these specific seminars and conferences, you need to do the research on the people that will be there. Normally, you can ask for some intel or information on who they are beforehand, because these are
You're talking about fellow speakers, you're talking about attendees, or everybody?
You can try your luck.
Okay.
Normally for speakers and key guests, they will be very clear who those are.
Yeah.
Normally for attendees, there are some that I tried my luck and they do tell me who they are. They don't give you the contact details. Yeah. But once you have that detail, you kind of have a hit list, because these things only last maybe half a day, max a day. And you don't have that much time to talk and to network. So you got to be very laser focused on the exact person you want to talk to. And that would be my tip for those kind of conferences.
But I want to go back to something else you said earlier at the trade show. You gave me the anecdotes about two different people coming by a booth and offering insights, which maybe helped you figure out what parts of your product to focus on, how to develop it, how do you pitch it to the customer, et cetera, right? But devil's advocate for a second. When you're standing at that booth, you're meeting 10, 15, 20, 30, sort of a finite number of people. You're not meeting 2,000. Isn't desktop research superior to this? You go talk to pick your favorite pet chatbot and go ask it and say, pretend to be so-and-so, what do you think about my pitch? And you ask it again, and you ask it again, ask it again. Isn't that faster and more time efficient, more cost efficient?
I would say desktop research generally gives you, to some extent, the general landscape and environment of things. And then there might be some very specific quotes that can be referenced based on online material. But for example, if we tie that back to my earlier conversation that I had with those two guys, I don't think any chatbot is going to exactly mention it so clearly from an end user's perspective.
Okay.
Which means that there will be new hypotheses when you are having that conversations, because people won't like to post about this in general, or they may, but unless they are very angry and they post on TikTok or something. There are minor nuances that you start to pick up when you have these conversations with the people on the ground. But I would say that those don't come automatically when you're at a trade show. You need to be ready to open that can of worms and questions and probe the people visiting your booth. So sometimes I ask more questions of the person than the person is asking about our stuff. And that's an intended thing that I do to extract this intel. And whatever desktop research that you do, and nowadays, of course, like you said, with all these chatbots and LLMs, it's a given. You need to be ready with that. It helps you to formulate all the early hypotheses that you need to be then testing out in these trade shows.
Right.
Because you want to know that, are you talking to people that are sample size of none, or are they really indicative of what the market is saying? Or does that group of people fit into your GTM, or do you need to adjust certain things, or the way your product works, or the way you market yourselves in that market, right? So it kind of works hand in hand. Desktop research cannot be excluded. Of course, it's a lot easier nowadays. Putting aside hallucinations, you got to fact check certain things. But hypothesis testing, you can really only do it by talking to end users face to face.
And then the other thing you said when we were talking about trade shows is it gives you market intelligence of a second kind, which is what your competitors are saying, etc. You can go do that. But you also said, if I heard you correctly, what people are saying about you. Did you mean you as in your own company, or do you mean you as in the kind of service you offer? Because if it's your own company and you're still relatively early, why would someone even have something to say about you? They may not have heard about you.
Not necessarily you as in the brand.
Okay.
Unless you are relatively big, kind of like a secret shopper thing. So we did send our interns on a few secret shopper-like exercises.
Right.
So how do they feel about video analytics? Have
Right.
they used it before? Have they tried it before? What are some of the pain points? Does it work for them? You know, and then you'll find really interesting conversations because you will start to hear things like, oh, yeah, the regulations here are not so strict. The general industry doesn't like to spend on this or whatever it might be. That is important information.
What do you do around the trade show beyond attending the event itself? Like, for example, do you set meetings around the event? Like, what else do you do around the thing?
Okay, so for a trade show nowadays, I would say the larger ones at least, they always have their very specific app for that trade show itself. And it can
And I find that super annoying.
It is annoying, but there is one hack to some extent.
Okay.
So for example, I just came back from Slush, right? Fortunate to go there thanks to the construction startup competition. But what I did was basically I went to Slush. So Slush has a website of your exhibitor login,
Yeah.
and you can see everybody there, right? So I basically just take the URL, pasted it in Claude. I tell them, go through every one of these person's company's profile, do some simple background research, which one is relevant, classify them as partners, customers, competitors, and then narrow down the list. And then from there, I decide which one I actually want to just message on the app. I agree, it's annoying, and not everyone looks at that app or at that chat phase like weeks before the actual expo or trade show, but you will get some hits, some conversion for sure. Again, similar to the seminar kind of experience I mentioned earlier, you also have to be laser focused in the trade show exhibition because that person may be just a visitor and not having an actual booth, and he may only be there on, like, for example, the first day. So you got to start setting up those meetings beforehand,
Right.
and you got to plan to also understand what kind of engagement or events are around the trade show. So this is something that, for example, when I was in GTM Dubai, there was events like 3 days out, and even parties.
Right.
There's so many of them. So you got to, of course, these are networking sort of events or just for you to have fun.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of these kind of things that happen just because everyone is kind of concentrated there. So it makes sense to have some of these yearly catch-up, exclusive events, specific events that are run by organizations, family offices, companies. And you got to look out for those as well. Those are not exactly endorsed by the organizer.
Yeah.
But you got to at least find, let's say in Dubai that week, what's going on in the various networks and forums, and try to get into those conversations or events as well, side events. We do a lot of basically everything in the list.
Yeah.
But it's all part of the GTM kind of channel strategy that we have as well. Yeah.
At what point would you consider becoming a sponsor of one of these events?
I did test the water a bit, I think twice. It's very expensive. Okay, expensive in my context. Right? Yeah. I paid like 5,000. I don't think that's very expensive in general, but it's not normally way more than what we would even pay in general for such trade shows.
Yeah.
The context of this trade show that I went is a large channel partner driven trade show.
Okay.
And I thought that being a sponsor and channel partner being our main GTM strategy, it'll be good to get a bit more presence. And I also wanted to test it out for myself. What does being a sponsor, getting some logo here and there, and a speaking opportunity actually mean? Because normally when you do all the other standard stuff, you don't get speaking opportunities. For this particular trade show that I went to, I don't think there was any fundamental additional value in the perspective of a startup that I got from being a sponsor.
I see.
If you're sponsoring a trade show or an exhibition, it's very different from sponsoring sometimes a seminar or a conference where there will be specific exclusive events that you actually get invited to because you are a sponsor. Then I think you got to kind of evaluate it from that perspective. Otherwise, in my opinion, the sponsorship is really more on brand positioning and optics.
I hear good arguments for actually in that situation is where you should actually spend money on becoming a sponsor. The logic being, I'm not sure whether it always applies. The logic is in a new place, being a sponsor, sort of people have never heard of you. They have no way of judging whether this is sort of small and up and coming company or big and whatever, right? You got to first lay the ground. Whereas in a place like this, you're actually trying to maintain your existing, right? Not create new relationships. You want to show people you already know me, but I'm actually getting even bigger. That's the logic people have generally applied. It's a bit like why Coca-Cola still buys ads, right? Everyone knows who Coca-Cola is. Why do we need to buy an ad, right? It's to make sure it's still top of mind. People still think of you. It's almost like you're sending a subconscious signal. I'm so important to you, or such a dominant force, etc. I can afford to throw money away, right? That's a subconscious negative signal you're sending. It's not so much of if I spend this $1, I'll get $2 back in sales. That's not it.
Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think for a startup in general, that generally does not apply to some extent.
Yeah.
So I would say use the money for better reasons than sponsoring.
How do you calculate ROI after an event? Is it subjective, simply saying, look, I went there, this was a lot of energy, I met a lot of people, here's a bunch of cards? Or is it much more sort of data-driven? I've got an actual spreadsheet, I plug in how much I spent on airfare, the food, the this, that, da-da-da. How much business did I get out of it? Which end of the spectrum are you?
We almost never calculate it to that extent. I don't think we ever calculate it like that. It's a lot more quantitative and based on feel. I think you can kind of feel it, whether it's worth or not, in the sense of a few metrics, right? So it's basically the quality of conversations. Second is how much new intel did you actually get? Third is how many new warm leads and partners you actually get, very straightforward. And lastly, it's also competitor insights. If I were to rank these four on a feeling basis, which is actually, because expos in general, we may send 2 to 3 people. It's very rare that we would have different consensus on the whole experience. So it's more of a feeling thing. During the expo, you kind of know whether it's good or not. If I were to refer back to my earlier point, initially I mentioned it's not really about selling. That's not the main gist of that trade show and the expo, at least in our context as a B2B enterprise SaaS solution. That's how we judge whether it's good.
I guess that also makes sense in your case because generally speaking, you're not incurring too much actual dollar cost, right?
Yep.
It's only time cost. The dollar cost you have is travel and hotel, which it's hard to get someone else to pay for. But you're not paying for a booth necessarily. You're not paying big sponsorship bucks, stuff like this. So your return on investment, the I of a ROI is literally how many people are you sending? How long did they spend standing there, right?
Yes,
exactly. So therefore, the return also can be qualitative because the time is qualitative.
Exactly.
What is the biggest mistake you ever made when attending a trade show or a conference?
I wouldn't call this necessarily a mistake, but to put it in context, this particular trade show was fully subsidized, like fully sponsored.
Okay.
It was also a relevant trade show that we needed to go to. And I also did my fair share of research and due diligence on the stuff around the trade show and everything that I mentioned earlier as well. But the only thing is that I couldn't find anyone to ask that actually went to that trade show before. When I went to this trade show, it was 4 days in another country. And the total number of people that we talked to at the booth over the 4 days was less than 20. There were a few factors that caused it. I think number one, there was another event happening in the same country at the same time. We don't necessarily go and look at these kind of things, but because of that, it affected the flow to this conference. Secondly, they changed the location of this conference, which was a really horrible location and very hard to get in and out, one road, which also kind of affected people. People was just turned off, like visitors are just turned off from even trying to go. Thirdly, the event itself had a lot of issues with logistics. So they had this similar issue in the past once we were at the expo and we started asking people. So they had a lot of issues with logistics on helping people exhibiting to bring their stuff in. So actually, over the years, people started going less and less, like good companies. So what happened was that even though that this expo was good in the past, it's not as good now. It actually went downhill. Because of these factors, the whole experience was horrible, and you just wasted time, right? To me, it's not so much on the cost of the flight ticket and the hotel. I think that's more trivial, but the cost of two of us being there, was a waste of time. So that would probably be our biggest mistake.
So the mistake in this case was going to an event where you hadn't actually done much homework before. Would you also say it was a mistake to stay for the full 4 days? Like after the first 2 days, you should know, right?
Yeah, I would say so, but I don't think I could because of the obligation.
I see.
There was free, and we had to be there strictly until certain times.
Got it.
Maybe that's a red flag. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got a booth. Your channel partner or whoever it is has kindly offered to give you a little space, carve it out for you. Now you've got a very small space. You want to make the best of it. What do you do?
We have tried many different things before. Of course, I'll start with the more obvious stuff first, which is, you just need to plaster your banner and sign in very noticeable positions before you even choose the slot, because sometimes you can choose the position. You ideally want to look at the floor plan and choose something that is at a major junction, at the corner. You don't want to be in the middle of a lane.
Right.
You want to be at the key junction, or you want to be near the food, or you want to be near very active open stages, not the closed ones. So those are typically good positions. Secondly, when it comes to the booth itself, generally having something interactive, whatever it is always very attractive. You want to make sure for us, for example, we sometimes set up cameras and toys, and we let people play with hard hats and look at the AI performing in real time. That generally attracts quite a lot of people. So anything interactive is great. Third one, this is something that we haven't done so much in the past. We're thinking about whether to do it. We do see ROI to some extent around gifts.
Okay.
Door gifts. A lot of people, they come and take the gift, or they take the gift but they have no intention of, it just adds noise.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a 50-50 for us whether there's ROI there or not. So these are more the conventional ones. The unconventional one is sometimes when we have spare flyers or leaflets, we go and put it on other people's very targeted fellow exhibitors' booth.
With their permission or without their knowledge?
Normally without, but just as what is this? Because someone would take it up and read it or something. And normally sometimes we do that right early, right before it starts, before we open the doors. We also try to position our banner sometimes not even at our booth. So we actually bring a secondary banner. And we put it at a location where, even if someone says, what is this banner here? They also, they would have to find this company to ask them to remove if they want to remove, which generally never happens. So you suddenly have another viewpoint of your solution, which you have done before. The third one is slightly different, but this is only because we have our partners in the expo as well. So when we have partners in the expo, we actually make sure we coordinate on the positioning so that it's not too close. This is a bit more nuanced, but that sometimes the solution seems different, but it's the same.
Okay. Tell me more.
So in Asia specifically, I would say in Southeast Asia, people do like to compare. This whole three-quote thing, multi-vendor approach, it's needed to some extent. So whether or not we do white label for key partners or strategic partners, but regardless of white labeling or not, having video analytics, we showing them and a partner showing, let's say they call themselves Mona Lisa. Right. And with slightly different videos and capabilities and things like that. Even outside of trade shows, you'll be surprised why people still choose to go with that, even though at the back of it is all us.
Right.
It might be sometimes because they like the salespeople there. It might be because they think that if they were to carry such a solution, it's more trustworthy than a startup, and all these other factors, right? So generally, sometimes we also don't really enforce them to say that this is an Ailytics product, because if they see that it's an Ailytics product, then they'll be like, okay, but I saw Ailytics there. Then it does not create that.
There's no additional delta.
There's no additional delta, and does not create that impression that there's some competition around and this is a different choice.
Right.
But in reality, it's not a choice. Yeah.
So same thing in a different skin.
Yes.
This is why for this episode, I've got a different hairstyle. Maybe we'll attract a different set of people to watch this video.
A/B testing of
A/B testing.
different looks. Which one the viewers are more interested in?
Who knows? I don't think people are here to look at me. I think they're here to look at you, actually. Yeah. You had some interesting, very, very fun ones about essentially expanding your flow space by putting a secondary banner somewhere else and putting your brochures and cheekily on someone else's desk and so on. I heard a great story once. This goes back a few years ago, where someone was asked whether they'd like to sponsor the drink session on the first day or something, okay, at a conference. Might have been a trade show. I don't care, okay? And they said, how much? It was some crazy price. Call it $30,000. And the guy said, we don't have that kind of money. We're sort of a small outfit and no thank you. But it put an idea into their heads. What they did instead was they rented the room next door at the same conference venue, put a big sign outside, and they did not, technically breach the terms of the organizer. They simply said, networking drinks for attendees of so-and-so conference. They didn't say this is networking drinks of this conference, right? It's very sharp. They spent probably a quarter what the other person was asking. Got a huge buzz. Initially, of course, they seeded it with their own people. Huge buzz. Everyone just went over. The original networking drinks of the actual organizer, I think they had very few. So it's a bit self-sustaining that they used, the positioning of the guys next door, but seeding it with their own people, and then it sort of gathers a life of its own.
That's very smart.
Very smart.
Yes.
It costs, of course, a bit more money than putting a secondary banner, but in their case was very worth it because they're also in the media industry, which is very sort of, the reputation is like fun-loving, party, that kind, right? So it was useful for that. What other unconventional things have, perhaps not even you, maybe you've seen others do that you might want to recommend?
Of course, when you go to a car show, you have the models, right? You have models along with the car show. It's kind of an expected norm to some extent. You don't generally see that with construction.
Yeah.
But for this one, some of the booths, they engage models that I would say to some extent are at least decent in explaining to the products. But the number of people in their booths, or at least dropping by their booths, which was just 2 booths away from us, is at least 5 times. I wouldn't say that, it definitely cannot be because of the product. I would say that. Like, it's a B2B software enterprise company like us as well.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure on the ROI, but I thought is that something that really works? Like, out of the noise, of course, of the 5x more people, are there actually legit people that would come out of that more than not doing this? I thought that was interesting. The other one is similar to the bottle one that you mentioned. Not similar in that sense that they had a adjacent booth, but they were giving out. You could play like a small game on it, like your typical Game Boy kind of games.
Okay. And so video game. It's not like a.
It's a video game, but you could win things at their booth the more you played it.
I see.
Like exhibitors were playing this thing there, and then of course their logo is at the back of it. They basically got everybody to their booth by giving this thing and playing, and the logo being very obvious behind when they're playing, and they're not even selling this thing. They're just selling some other solution. I thought that was quite interesting. I'm not sure on the ROI again, but quite cool. Yeah. These are the 2 that I could think of.
We've gone a deep dive on trade shows and conferences. Let's touch on, briefly on some of the other avenues for Tofu, right? So we talked briefly earlier about desktop research. We talked about direct sales, even BDRs. These are, I think, reasonably well known. There's one which I think a lot of Singapore startups may or may not realize is a very viable and useful avenue, which is mission trips. And whether it be your Enterprise Singapore or IMDA or even the industry specific ones, very often they organize these things. And I'm sure you've been on a couple of these, and in fact, you've probably heard of many more that you haven't even been on. How do you think about these? Are they helpful? In what context are they helpful, if they are?
Mission trips, I would say, in general, more often than not, they are very helpful and they are very strategic, with the main intention of it being shortcut to direct exposure to key personnel that may or may not be relevant to you.
Okay.
So mission trips, so we have been on a few ESG stars and a few others. Because the success of a mission trip is largely all boiling down to the organizer and their ability to set a good schedule and get the relevant people in for meetings and not just fill it with some random stuff. That, I think, has to be the first assessment of whether or not you should be on the mission trip. Then when you go on the mission trip, depending on the context, some of it are more like national agenda, country to country. They have selected this particular vertical as a key topic. And those are absolutely stuff that you should be on, because those kind of meetings, you'll be meeting very key, influential, relevant either government agencies or people in the industries for your vertical. But at the same time, I have also been on mission trips where they are a bit more fluid, where they can even tailor. They have some fixed slots and some open slots. And in the open slots, you can either arrange your own meetings or you try to leverage on the organizer to help you get specific meetings for you, which I think it's a bit of unspoken rule. Normally people just see the mission trip and they follow the plan. But generally, you depending on how good the organizer or flexible they are, you can generally ask for quite a couple of things. Like even for mission trips that we are on, the schedule is tight, but sometimes because I'm in the country, I just need to meet certain people that are very critical at that point in time, and I need to deviate a bit and all this. And then they try to help us to do that. Sometimes they have drivers, they use their drivers to bring us there and then bring us back while they're having their meeting, etc. So you need to be tactical even on a mission trip as well. But on top of that, all the people that you are meeting in the mission trip, you're not going to be expecting, you're not there to close deals. You're there again for market presence, optics, and to start that high-level conversation. But you have kind of taken a short path accelerated route. And post the mission trip, similar to trade shows and etc., you need to maintain these relationships. Otherwise, they're not. You can't expect the organizer to do that for you.
I know, at least in Singapore, the agency is, I would say, quite good at organizing and making a good, outcome for all the participants. But how could they be superlative, like every single one? What are your wish list? Maybe one or two things that you would pass on, or we can pass on to them.
I believe I passed this on to ESG.
Good.
But the two things. Number one, the post part of the mission trip, because, for example, let's say ESG does have officers in all these places, and of course they use the local officers or leverage on them to also help structure the mission trips. For example, the last one I went was to in Saudi. It was really well organized. And post that, I kept very closely in touch with the ESG personnel there so that he could help push some conversations that were kind of tapering off, because sometimes you kind of need people there to help you reignite those conversations to some extent. So that anything post follow up, if you're stuck, of course you yourself, you cannot be expecting not to do anything and you ask them for everything.
Yeah,
you got to be of course trying what you're supposed to be doing with following up, etc. But if things don't work out well, at least you can rely on the organizer or the organizer's local presence there to restart the conversations. I think that would be very, very good and useful for all companies on going for mission trips. That's one.
it sounds like they're already doing it though, right? So I mean, when you ask them, they're happy to do it.
It's not for all mission trips,
Right.
I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, if they can make this, I can understand from their perspective as well. You can't be helping everyone. They have to be strategic and selective on who they help. and how much effort the person puts in also maybe is a factor of how much they help them and etc.
Okay.
But if they can be more official in that sense, because this is not, no one said this. It's just because I kind of built up a good relationship with the person on the trip, so we kept in contact.
Got it.
The second part is the people that they engage or the companies that we are meeting on the mission trip. To some extent, they all have a certain purpose. And I understand when they bring a delegation, you kind of want the whole delegation to go so that it doesn't seem like why this company is meeting this delegation and half of us are missing because we are somewhere else. But it's also important to stick to a very particular theme and vertical and to be very clear about that and to make sure that all the events and activities are just for that. That does not happen all the time because I think some of them may be fillers or maybe because of the cross-country agreements they have to slot in some of these. But my wish is that for those that there may be some flexibility that they can buffer for 20% of the delegation or 10% of the delegation to potentially drop out of any session if they feel like it's not relevant for them to do something else as an explicit option without the company or the delegation feeling bad that they just have to attend this.
Right.
Yeah. If that could be kind of like a rule, could be a nice mechanic to have some flexibility there.
And on a somewhat related note, when you're going into new countries, I know that in your case, a lot of the customers are coming via local partners, channel partners, SIs, and so on. Maybe just briefly talk about how do you go about finding and assessing who's the right partner for you?
So partner is at the core of our strategy, anything we do. And channel partners, maybe I'll break it into the 3 groups of channel partners because they have slightly different ways of assessment. First group are very obvious partners, which are the camera installers for us. Second group are your resellers, system integrators, distributors. And the third group are basically your associations, government agencies, etc. So for the first group, generally for cameras, it's more of a commodity. Every country can have camera installers and cameras are just cameras in general.
Yeah.
To some extent, it makes more sense to partner with us to value add, to even push more of their cameras in, so they would want to do that.
So in that case, you would choose the biggest or do you choose the hungriest? Who would you choose?
We like to have a mix. You can't always choose the biggest because the biggest normally has too much either red tape, protocols, minimum deal size or requirements that restrict them from doing too small of a jobs, which could be, if those kind of customers are still relevant of you, then you definitely need to have partners that can support you in that as well. Yeah. So you need to have a mix of the big ones and the medium-sized ones, but regardless, both would still be more than happy to carry your product.
In other words, this is not exclusive.
Maybe the exclusivity part is a separate one regardless of which partner they are.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing that I can mention a bit on for exclusivity. But to assess a camera installer, it's mostly about response time, support, and pricing. It's more transactional, it's clear cut. You have a bit more, we in this case have a bit more leverage in that sense from the power dynamics. Yep. So you can be more quantitative in that sense.
Got it.
From assessment. For the second group, it tends to be a bit more tricky because you have to understand the nuances between who is the incumbent in general, who does not like who is the partner of somebody else, XYZ. You got to pay attention to those dynamics because sometimes if you partner with one, you automatically get excluded to others already. And you also have to assess how many of them are just asking you for stuff all the time, but there does not seem to be any closure. There's no proactive updates. Yeah. There are certain non-negotiables for us that we cut them off immediately. For example, things like overselling, not understanding customer requirements, just trying to shove the products down their throat, or just marking up too high and not willing to budge. So there are some things that are non-negotiable for us. If we see those signs of those, we generally try to cut them short. So assessing this second group of system integrators, resellers, is really more on their ability to take as much of the funnel of the sales cycle as much as possible, all the way from marketing to pre-sales, solutioning, sometimes even deployment, sometimes even post-sales. The more that they can take, the better it is for us, and the more that we'll be happy to give them in terms of commissions.
Got it.
Right? So that's how we assess the second group. The third group, which is the associations and the governments, etc. For these, in general, I don't think we expect much. It's more nice to have, right?
Okay.
We're not really going to say no to a government wanting to engage or work with us. We do that more on a high level, strategic policy influence, lobbying, consulting of specs, educating the market, which are all very, very key activities that we just need to have as many as possible relevant channels to do this stuff, so that it will all then funnel back to us and our partners being able to sell better in that market.
Is it possible for a Singapore company to get help from a government agency in other countries?
There are a few ways of engagement. We are talking to a few governmental entities at the moment. And some of the reasons could be, number one, in terms of the maturity of the solution, maybe in that market, they may not be an equivalent to some extent. They want outside expertise. Secondly, could be around the best practices that we're actually bringing from the countries that we operate in to help them formulate their own specifications and standards, and to help them just understand in general, how does this work? What's the best way of engagement? Because they're still in the early days of formulating this stuff. So those in general would be reasons why they would engage us. But the more you show that you are willing to spend in that country in terms of entering, in terms of potentially setting up an office, in terms of talent, there will then be specific programs that starts to be unlocked and opportunities that you need to grab. So, for example, for us, we are very entrenched in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong Science Park has been very kind to us. I don't think they treat us any differently from any other park or Hong Kong company there. But we help them as well in terms of even sometimes pulling in good quality startups and recommending Hong Kong as a potential place to go, or Singapore. And this kind of dual-sided relationship, them leveraging on us even as a channel, does pay back for us in terms of them helping us.
You mentioned exclusivity when we are evaluating channel partners and so on. Tell me more about that.
In my experience, the reason why I said yes to this exclusivity, for context, exclusivity means that we are allowing a particular channel partner to only be the one able to sell our solution in that market or in that vertical for a period or X period of time or whatever terms. So the reason why I said yes to this exclusivity is because in that market, I assess that it will take a long time for us to penetrate the channels because there are incumbents. There are quite a number of incumbents already. And the partner that we are kind of going into bid with has a lot of projects under their mother company, which means that you are almost guaranteed a certain number of projects by default, even though they do sell to companies outside of their parent or mother company. Because of these two major factors, I decided to say yes to this exclusivity for a year, and it turned out to work incredibly well. One of the tricky parts that we had to navigate was post the exclusivity period, because we did put terms in it and they did meet it. But I think for that kind of conversation, it can be tricky, which I wouldn't say I exactly know how to handle it well yet. But in this particular situation, we managed to come to an agreement that there are certain things that we reserve for them and there's certain priorities that are reserved for them, but we remove the exclusivity clause because now we also need to do other things in that market that we have been established in.
If you're getting into this zone of exclusivity with someone, one danger obviously is that they're just not capable, they're lazy, whatever. There are other priorities that happen. How do you guard against that? Is it by saying, look, if you don't do such and such within, let's say 2 months out of the 1 year, then this falls away? Or do you you give them a lower margin? Like, what are you doing to incentivize them to do more?
The terms and how you structure it for exclusivity needs to be absolutely ironclad. When you talk about duration, tiered, ramping up either MOQ or commission or X number of dollars or whatever it might be, of course you have to kind of discuss and agree with the partner, but it has to make sense for you. It needs to make sense for both of you to be a win-win situation. If you feel like the terms are unfair and you don't think you can change them, more often than not, depending on how critical the market is, maybe that's not the right deal to take. There are some markets that are well known for asking for exclusivity upfront as well, Middle East being one. So you got to proceed with caution. Is it the industry norm? Is it a cultural norm? Is it the right partner? You got to test it out, weigh all your options. It's not a decision that you take very lightly, overnight. You have to really assess all the other opportunity costs and options before you decide to say yes. But in general, yes. The terms and how you want to structure it. Generally, I like to structure it as 1 year. My take is that if they are good in presenting and we know that our solution is needed in the market, if you have X number of engagements, eventually it will convert. And also, I like to put a dollar amount because you can't have 5 projects with $1 each. Then there's no use. So these 3 minimally should be there. Other terms, however you want to structure it, you can look into that. But it can, I wouldn't say to exclude it right away. It can be a good channel or a way to go with exclusivity under the right conditions.
This kind of partner sounds like a value-added reseller or system integrator, one of those. What about people who act effectively as sales agents? Okay, and by that I mean, essentially they are business development organizations who might even carry your card. It might even say James at ailytics.ai on their business card with your logo, etc. Right? Would you ever consider that? And if so, in what situations would you consider those kinds of people?
Actually, we have done it already. Not in the exclusivity sense of view.
Not exclusively, but they're representing you as if they are your company.
We will only do that after we have established some form of relationship or work with them for a bit. And where they are more kind of, single person distributors.
Okay.
So they are not organizations. They are extremely well networked individuals. But to give the customers a better understanding of the relationship dynamics and identity, we give them this role. So it's not something we do lightly. So we have, for example, one of them is in Malaysia, and the title is Regional AI Ambassador. And he is a distributor with extremely a lot of connections, and he has brought us a lot of opportunities. And because of that, he's distributing that name card more often than his own now.
Right.
And that is a very strong channel for us. But in that sense, because it's not exclusive, we also need to make sure from a partnership and business perspective, we honor and acknowledge that effort. This also comes into our broader GTM strategy in general. But if there's some co-inbound deal, we may just pass it on to him to say, why not you just try to nurture this deal instead?
Right.
Because we want to have a kind of two-way win-win situation, right? And not just, I have you non-exclusive and I have a bunch of other people as well. Of course, he needs to be doing good work.
The business development consultants and so on that I was thinking of, you're even paying them, not you necessarily, but I'm saying the people who engage them are paying them on a monthly basis plus a commission. Whereas for a channel partner or an SI, they're not getting paid by you. They're getting paid by their customer, and they make a markup on your piece of the tech, but they also sell services on top, right? So would you ever consider the one that I just talked about, where it's someone who's almost acting like an employee for you, but really they're an arm's length contractor, and they may have other clients as well, but they charge a monthly retainer, whatever it is, plus commission.
Yep, we actually do have that kind of engagements as well. We have 2 of them. One is in Australia and one has 2 salesperson in all the major Southeast Asian countries. I would say that model works if, number one, they already come with all the relevant connections and they can hit the ground running relatively quickly.
Yeah.
They really understand what it takes to sell your solution and how to position it so that they don't rely on you too much to help them present or have technical solutioning stuff. So essentially, they should be able to take almost everything up until the point of sale without too much of your involvement, except the start where you kind of have to train and enable them. And also for the good ones, they need to be very transparent about what they are, how they are tracking their metrics, their engagements, follow-ups, everything from that perspective. So for example, I will use our Australia partner. I think they're really good. Shout out to Ignite partners. They have this very systematic thing. Everything is tracked in Notion. They use tools that I don't even know how to use, like Lemlist, that basically can do cold outreach in LinkedIn. And I'm also very surprised that the conversion rate is so high from that. And they track everything and do fortnightly updates. They don't oversell. They follow up very closely, even though there's no feedback. And they know the right amount of nuances to make sure that culturally and business-wise that they are approaching the customers in the right way for the market that they are serving. So if these paid ones come with the full package like this and not one part short, it may be worth to consider, because otherwise, let's say in a market like Australia, I may be having to pay quite a lot more to even experiment if I want to put our own guys there.
We often receive listener questions from our guests as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's one we received from a guy called Surendra Singh of Viact, right? And you know Viact. I'm sure you've come across them because coincidentally, you have very similar target markets. The fact that you've been generous about sharing your tips makes actually his question quite an interesting one, because he's asking, how do you deal with competitors picking up your marketing and GTM playbooks and adopting it for themselves?
I would say that whatever I'm going to say next is, I have to set the context here. We are providing a solution in a very niche space,
right,
and industry. There are not that many players. Any marketing that a competitor will do is marketing for you, in the sense of marketing and educating the market. Because a lot of the companies and people around the world today may not necessarily understand what is video analytics and what use cases can it actually do and how can it help my operations. So there are a lot of education that still needs to be done that doesn't necessarily have to be done by us. But then what we can focus on is, for the customers that potentially have tried other products before, what are those gaps and how can we focus on them? I'm generally open to share all this because I don't think the gap will come from the product per se. There are certain key things that people already know from a technical and product advantage that we have, and we've been around for over years already, that are public knowledge. And yes, some probably have tried to copy, some failed, and etc. That's just part and parcel of free markets and competition. But what cannot really be copied is executional, I would say, excellency, if I were to even call it that, right? How you build that relationships with the customer. How do you build that trust? What SOPs do you have in the company to build long-lasting relationship? How do you go about channels, assessing partners, incentivizing them? All these soft touch, relationship-driven market insight, intelligence approach, those are hard to copy, because it's not like today you can say that Ailytics customer success is top tier. Let's build a customer success team. That's just not how it's going to work, because you need to understand what kind of people you need, how to build a good one, and all these other nuances, right? That is extremely hard to copy. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we have been so strong. Our retention is extremely high. and we don't do too much marketing as well.
In fact, this reminds me of the anecdote you said earlier about going to Saudi and the enterprise Singapore person there being happy because they knew you after a while to follow up with people, right? But then you said that moment that you would like enterprise Singapore to make this sort of a blanket rule, like apply to all missions, to all companies. Which, I mean, generally it's a nice thing for you to say, but if you are executing sort of this aspect in terms of making sure you build a relationship and ask them and also give them back other things, right? Help them in their own jobs, etc. Why would you want them to, institutionalize it? Maybe it should be just a Wei Zhuang secret tip, or only, even if it's not secret, only you can execute because you have the knack.
I'm generally quite generous, whether it's with a competitor or not. We do chat with our competitors from time to time.
Right.
And I do hope that they do well to some extent, as well as for us as a solution and the industry.
Right.
Video analytics, let's say for our solution, is generally quite hard to assess on paper before you decide to buy it. You can say that your solution is top tier, you have 50 overuse cases, you are 99% accuracy. I can say the same. Customers, unless they're going to go on a full-fledged trial, multi-vendor, which they're not really going to do, they can't tell.
Yeah.
They can only tell what's on paper. So we need some kind of comparison. And if we help, and there are more competitors in different markets using and competitors trying other people's solution, it gives them a comparison point. So when we go in, it's very easy to say, you already know the basics, and I know you have these problems, and this is our difference. So without having more customers, sometimes it's also harder for us to completely open the market ourselves, even from a selling perspective, similar to the market education perspective as well.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Many years ago, I wrote a blog post. You remember blogs? There used to be these
blogs,
things.
Yeah. Blogspot.
So I wrote a blog post about, sometimes companies come in pitching me and saying, we have no competitors. Usually when I hear that, I run for the hills. It's like, oh my goodness, either this person is lying to me, usually not, or they are naive and think they have no competitors when they actually have, or the rare case where they really have no competitors. That's the one that really makes me want to run for the hills, because it tells me they're either way too early for the market, or no one wants this stuff, or whatever, right? You do want, as you said, some reference points. So anyway, a long answer, Surendra, to your question. I hope that answered it. To anyone else who wants to send in questions, you can. Details are in the description.
Hi, Surendra. Hope we get to meet one day.
Just want to get a bit broader, right? Advice more generally for other founders on your leadership style. And there's no correct answers here. How do you describe your leadership style?
Dynamic. Because you can't say that you only have one style. You need to be ready to adapt and change to different styles in different situations or different stages of the company. Let's say the company is in a crisis mode. You cannot be still trying to get consensus.
Right.
It's just going to sink the ship. So for us, in general, the default expectation, at least my leadership style and the culture that we strongly enforce and heavily try to cultivate in the company, is really about low ego, high agency, problem solvers. And that's as simple as that. Because once you cultivate this culture, and I mean, I came from Boeing. I've seen good, bad, and ugly teams before, and I've seen the impact of these bad and ugly teams where the negative implications or damage is not just isolated to the person alone. Generally, it infects everybody around it as well.
Yeah.
From day one in Ailytics, at least, we focus on this part a lot, even until today. But we don't compromise on these values, no matter how technically inclined or smart they are.
So how does your co-founder style differ from yours? And also, I'm sure it's different. How do you guys make it work?
We are both workaholics. Our mindsets are generally quite in tune, in the sense that we are both very logical and we can look at the big picture and small picture at the same time quite well. And we have complementary skill sets, so that tends to work out well. Believe it or not, we are both introverts, very, very introverted. We don't necessarily communicate a lot. We have our syncs and chats and things like that. But we know what are our responsibilities, and we are just executing on those to our best capacity and efficiency. And that is why I think make us such a strong team. I tend to like when there's smarter people around. And I like to look for people with raw talent rather than technical competency to some extent, unless the role that we are looking for really needs that baseline competency. That of course, you must have it. But that part of the soft skills and how they will fit in the culture of the company, I do look at that very closely. There's one thing that I mentioned to a candidate very recently because they asked me how do I evaluate whether a candidate is suitable beyond their qualifications. Internally, I do think about the MBTI and the character of this person relative to the team that he or she will be in. Because, for example, there's a metric called DISC. I can't remember what exactly it's called now, but D stands for dominant. You cannot have two tigers on a hill in a team of 4. It's just going to be chaotic. So I do look for that part in the person as well, which is very critical and beyond the soft skills, beyond the technical skills, right? Because we are talking about personality traits.
Yep.
And I think you want to build a well-functioning OIT team. You need a good mix of various personality traits in the team as well.
What is one thing you believe about company building that most people would disagree with?
You don't really need to do your big picture strategy plans and things like that until much later stage. A lot of things are mostly tactical. I mean, I was recently talking to a few much larger companies, Series B, few $100 million kind of valuation companies as well. They say that they really had no major strategy business plan until they were doing even $80 million revenue. But I think the gist was that you make very good tactical moves. If every day you reflect on your day and you say that, yeah, today I think was a productive day. I made good choices. I don't have too much idling time. The team was doing good work as well. That means you are moving, it generally just compounds. As long as the direction is set, you have all these tactical moves. The more tactical moves that you can make and the higher chance you increase your luck, you are just going to reach there. If you are starting to feel like people are idling, if you're starting to feel like I'm doing a lot of tedious work, I'm getting blocked internally because of internal politics or red tape or whatever, then you know that something is not going right already, and those need to be fixed. Tactical moves, day by day. For me, my calendar is fluid. Like every 2 weeks, it just suddenly fills up, right? And same for my team as well. I think that's very important. At least maybe I'm not sure whether people know about that or focus a lot on big picture plans, but no.
No, I'm really glad you said this because we say it slightly differently, but essentially the same thing. I even asked one of my previous guests this about their thoughts on, look, actually, you said compounding. I actually say in the reverse. Figure out what you don't want to do, what you want to avoid, and just don't do that, right? So every mistake you avoid, every wrong turn you take, etc., is going to be negative. As long as you don't do those things, by default, you're progressing.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Right? We're coming to the end of the podcast. We can relax a bit now. Can you tell us one unusual fact or story about yourself? You can't use the computer game one anymore because you've already done that.
I was a semi-pro gamer though.
Is that right? Okay.
My total career earnings wasn't a lot. I just won like $1,200. But I did have a short stint.
Okay. No, as I said, you can't use that. You got to tell me an unusual one that your colleagues don't know.
Well, some of my colleagues know this, so I'll use that as a bit of a caveat.
Always looking for the way out. Good. I like it.
No one really studies when you study overseas, I think in general. I did make quite a bit of money playing online poker, and to an extent that I was sponsored. You could say that a good chunk of my time was doing that. I was studying, but studying something different.
You still play now?
I play casually with my friends. I don't think they like to play with me that much because of obvious reasons.
But you told me you like to be in company of people who are smarter than you. So this is clearly not worked out.
Not in the sense of the skill sets of poker. I don't kind of, go to those kind of professional games anymore or serious hobbies.
Yeah.
Which they are still, because in Singapore, of course, it's technically not allowed.
Right.
But that, interesting fun fact. I think that experience gave me a lot of intuition into reading people, which has translated to whatever I do today. I think I would shamelessly at least say that I do have quite good skills at reading people to some extent. Yeah. How? Don't ask me, but I can kind of just look at you and talk to you and then form a generally correct assessment relatively quickly. Yeah.
If anyone listening to this or watching this on video wants to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
I would say contact me on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Or if you are a partner, customer, or you want to collaborate, feel free to drop an email to our marketing email, and then we'll reach out and have a chat.
So many thanks for being so gracious with your time, Wei Zhuang. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Murli.
Tune in again for the next episode of Unfair Advantage from Tin Man Capital. Thanks for listening. Tin Man Capital also organizes events and shares other resources for founders and investors and everyone else in the community. To stay in the loop, follow our company LinkedIn page or go to www.tinman.asia for more information. And remember, if you like this episode, tell your friends. If you didn't like it, tell your enemies.